Chidera let out a deafening scream and ran out of the room. Chidera, who seemed to have lost her mind, bolted down the stairs, screaming hysterically. Ikenna ran after her, begging her to stop, but Chidera kept screaming as she kept running, looking back to see if Ikenna was still after her. While looking back, she lost a footing and slipped, falling hard down the crooked stairs. Once upon a time, there lived a very handsome prince named Ikenna. Prince Ikenna was every woman's dream. He was extremely rich, powerful, and very handsome. His mother, Queen Adaku, adored him with everything she had. King Ikenga had passed away 2 years ago, so Queen Adaku was ruling as regent. Prince Ikenna, who was the heir to the throne, could not ascend the throne until he got married. It was until he was married that he was fit to ascend the throne of his fathers. Despite his good looks and perfect life, Prince Ikenna could not keep a woman. In fact, Prince Ikenna has been married 7 times, but all of them left on their wedding night. But they never said why. They all left quietly and disappeared. After several failed attempts to find a wife, Queen Adaku took it upon herself to choose a wife who would love her son for who he is. That was when she remembered Chidera, her friend's daughter who just returned from the United States. She was childhood friends with Prince Ikenna, and she remembered how Chidera used to adore Prince Ikenna when they were teenagers. And so, she decided that she was the perfect fit. Queen Adaku invited Chidera and told her of her plans to get them married. Chidera was so happy. She loved Ikenna, but he had never approached her on love matters. Finally, her dreams would finally come to pass. Chidera was slim, tall, and very beautiful. She had a bright brown eyes that glimmered when she smiled. She had always loved Prince Ikenna, and now she can finally become his wife. The grand wedding ceremony finally came. It was filled with joy, laughter, and happiness. People from all walks of life came to celebrate, and soon the day was over. Prince Ikenna and Chidera retired to their room. Chidera couldn't wait to make love to Ikenna. It was a night she had dreamt of all her life. She took a shower and put on her intoxicating perfume. She climbed slowly to the bed, her hand running slowly on Prince Ikenna's body. But to her greatest surprise, Prince Ikenna told her to sleep. Chidera was confused. She tried to seduce Ikenna but received a strict warning to stop. Chidera felt so bad and disappointed. She was a beautiful woman and didn't understand why the prince was rejecting her. Chidera couldn't sleep. She watched as Ikenna slept, looking as handsome as ever. Chidera couldn't hold herself. She could not hold her urge to have him. So, to satisfy her desires, she crawled to Ikenna and slowly began to remove his clothes. Prince Ikenna was heavily intoxicated and was fast asleep. Chidera saw a cloth tied firmly around his chest. Curious, she tiptoed to the drawer and brought out a pair of scissors and cut off the cloth. Chidera's mouth dropped as a pair of fresh round breasts stared right back at her. Her hand flew to her mouth to prevent any sound from escaping. She stared at the breasts in utter shock. They were bigger and even fresher than hers. Curious as to what was down there, Chidera cut through Ikenna's trousers slowly, afraid she would wake him up. Down there, she saw the shock of her life. There was neither a male or female organ. The place was bare and empty, flat and sealed. Shocked out of her mind, Chidera let out a deafening scream and ran out of the room. Prince Ikenna woke up and found himself naked. "Damn it!" he said angrily, hitting the mattress hard. Chidera, who seemed to have lost her mind, bolted down the stairs, screaming hysterically. Ikenna ran after her, begging her to stop, but Chidera kept screaming as she kept running, looking back to see if Ikenna was still after her. While looking back, She lost a footing and slipped, falling hard down the crooked stairs. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctors who admitted her told Ikenna that her condition was very severe as she was in utter shock. Ikenna could not hold himself. He sat down, tears streaming down his face. What has he done to deserve all this? He cried, praying for her recovery. Queen Adaku ran into the premises, asking Ikenna what happened. After hearing everything, Adaku broke down in tears. I thought she would love you enough to stay with you as you are. Who will marry you again after this, my son? She wept uncontrollably as Ikenna tried to comfort her. You see, many years ago, when Prince Ikenna was just 6 months old, Queen Adaku had taken him strolling in the garden. Adaku left Ikenna with one of the maids to go ease herself inside the mansion. But when she returned, she saw a strange old dirty woman carrying and kissing Prince Ikenna. She got so upset and snatched Ikenna from her. After insulting the daylight out of the poor woman, she kicked her out of the palace. The old widow, who had come to the palace to complain to the king about her in-laws who had stolen all her lands, which was her only means of survival from her. But Queen Adaku kicked her out and ordered for her not to be let into the palace premises ever again. The widow told Adaku that for humiliating and insulting her, she would be the only human to carry and love Ikenna for the rest of her life, unless she finds a woman who will love her son more than she does. The words touched Adaku, but she brushed it off, not knowing that she had set something horrible in motion. 2 days later, Prince Ikenna's genitals began to disappear. First, his little manhood began to shrink till it disappeared completely. Then as he grew older, he began to develop breasts like a woman. Adaku took care of Ikenna herself without any other person touching or seeing him, because she did not want anyone else to know about her son's condition. She took him to all kinds of doctors, but they were as shocked themselves to see such a thing. She knew that what the old woman said to her that fateful day was the cause of the predicament, so she began searching for her. But unfortunately, when she found her, the poor widow, without any means of survival, had died. Adaku took Ikenna to different spiritual houses, but none could help. It was a miracle he was alive. Where would she see someone who would love her son more than she, his mother? She thought Chidera loved Ikenna as much as she did, but she was wrong. After several weeks, Chidera was discharged from the hospital. Immediately she got back to the palace. She began to organize her things, packing every of her belongings, and then she moved out of the palace. The news of Chidera leaving the palace spread like wildfire. People began to talk. Something was wrong with Prince Ikenna. But what? Was he impotent? Was he abusive? They guessed, but no one could get it right. The ladies who once flocked around Prince Ikenna began avoiding him like a plague. All of a sudden, no one wanted to marry Prince Ikenna anymore. They all thought that he was involved in something diabolical, and no woman wanted anything to do with him. They all feared for their lives. And without a wife, he could not ascend the throne of his fathers. Prince Ikenna was torn. One night, he stood by the balcony and stared at the moon, lost in thoughts. Then suddenly, he broke down in tears. Itunu, a beautiful maiden in the palace, hid by the walls and watched Prince Ikenna cry. She too began to cry as her heart ached to see the prince in such pain. Acting purely on impulse, she rushed out from where she was hiding and ran to him, hugging him from behind. Prince Ikenna, thinking it was his mother, held her hands and cried bitterly. Soon, after crying his heart out, he felt better and turned to thank his mother for her companion. But he was shocked to see Itunu. Itunu sank to her knees and pleaded for forgiveness for her audacity. The prince was dumbfounded. Itunu stood up to leave, but Prince Ikenna told her to just stand there with him. The hug was soothing and comforting, and now he did not know what his heart was keeping. They stood there together in silence, but Prince Ikenna felt this overwhelming peace with Itunu just standing there beside him. After that night, Prince Ikenna would call Itunu to the balcony every day, and soon they began to talk and laugh together like old friends. And before Prince Ikenna realized it, he couldn't go a day without talking to Itunu. But what Prince Ikenna didn't know is that Itunu has been in love with him since she was 16 years old. You see, Itunu was born inside the palace, and she had served in the palace all her life. Itunu knew that the prince was out of her league, so she was satisfied just seeing him every day. Soon, Prince Ikenna realized that for the first time in his life, he was in love. He told his mother about his intentions to marry Itunu, but the queen forbade it. Queen Adaku was certain that she was a gold digger who just wanted the wealth and fame of royalty. After fighting for several days about the topic, Queen Adaku decided to give in. She was certain that once Itunu knew of his weakness, she would pack up and leave. Soon, Prince Ikenna and Itunu got married, and for the first time in his life, Prince Ikenna was extremely happy. That night, Queen Adaku lingered by the door, expecting Itunu to scream and run out of the room like the others. But as she stood there, she heard a loud scream. But it wasn't from Itunu. It was from Prince Ikenna. Scared out of her mind, Queen Adaku burst into the room. Inside the room, Prince Ikenna stood in front of the mirror, stark naked, his manhood as big as a cassava, hard and straight. Queen Adaku stopped dead in her track. Then, like a woman who had seen something for the first time in her life, she ran to Ikenna. She grabbed his manhood, staring at it happily, tears flowing from her eyes. How? How did this happen? Ikenna couldn't talk. All he did was stare blankly at his own magnificent manhood. Adaku hugged Ikenna, crying bitterly. Soon, both began to cry. Finally, you are a man, my son. Itunu, who was overwhelmed with everything happening, just sat on the bed, staring blankly at both mother and son. Was she dreaming? She had zeroed her mind about ever making love in her life. She knew she would die a virgin, since her husband didn't have any genitals. But now, all of a sudden, all her lost hope has been restored. She looked at Prince Ikenna just standing there, looking more handsome than ever. The breast on his chest had disappeared, replaced by a strong, smooth muscles. Itunu burst into tears, knowing she can be intimate with the man she had loved all her life. Prince Ikenna went to her, and they hugged tightly. He kissed her deeply on the lips as they looked into each other's eyes. Adaku knew what was about to go down, so she excused herself from the room. Well, as you must have guessed, the night was filled with moans of pleasure. Prince Ikenna and Itunu's screams of passion filled the entire palace. You see, few days before their wedding, Prince Ikenna had invited Itunu into his room. He stripped himself naked of all his clothes and showed Itunu who he really was. He wanted her to know what she was getting into, knowing that he could not satisfy her sexually. Itunu had looked at him with tears in his eyes. She now understood why all the women had left him. She went to him and held his hands, crying bitterly. I will never leave you. I love you just the way you are. Just having you in my life is enough. Prince Ikenna knew that for the first time, he has found the love of his life. As Queen Adaku left the room, she broke down in tears. Finally, her son was a man. He has finally found the love of his life, who finally broke the curse. Queen Adaku knew that Itunu was Ikenna's cure. She made his life whole again, She now knew that Itunu loved her as much as she did, and secretly wished they had met earlier. Now she can die a fulfilled and happy woman. For the first time in years, Queen Adaku was truly happy. Prince Ikenna was finally crowned the king and Itunu the queen of the kingdom. They went on to have 6 beautiful children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And then they lived happily ever after.